Hello, friends. If this joke tickled your funny bone, don't forget to hit subscribe. It's an easy way to keep the humor flowing into your feed. Don't miss the last one. That is special joke for you.
A traveling ventriloquist on the road in between jobs decided to practice his craft before his next show. He stopped at a farmhouse and approached the farmer who lived there. "Hello there, Mr. Farmer. I was just passing by and I was wondering if I might speak to your dog." The farmer replied, "Well, you know, dogs don't talk." The ventriloquist said, "You'd be surprised what a dog might tell you. Can I speak with him?" The farmer, eyeing the ventriloquist suspiciously, called his dog. "Hi there, Mr. Dog," said the ventriloquist. "How does the farmer treat you?" To which the dog replied, "Oh, he's great. He throws a stick for me. He scratches my belly, and I just love him." Needless to say, the farmer was dumbfounded. Wanting to see if he could fool the farmer again, the ventilator asked if he could speak with the farmer's horse. "Well, you know, horses don't talk." Again, the ventriloquist said, "You'd be surprised what a horse might tell you." So the farmer brought out his horse. "Say, Mr. Horse, how does the farmer treat you?" asked the ventriloquist. The horse then replied, "Oh, I think he's great. He feeds me oats. He puts a blanket over me at night, and I just love him." Again the farmer was amazed. Wanting to try his luck a third time, the ventriloquist said, "Mr. Farmer, would you like to hear what the sheep has to say about you?" "Well," said the farmer uncomfortably, "sheep lie, you know." A man is sent to prison for the first time. The first night there, after the lights in the cell block are turned off, he immediately sees his cellmate going over to the bars and yelling, "12!" The whole cell block breaks out laughing. A few minutes later, somebody else in the cell block yells, "4!" Again, the whole cell block breaks out laughing. "Why are you guys just yelling numbers?" he asks his cellmate. "What's so funny about random numbers?" "Well," says the older prisoner, "they're not random. It's just that we've all been in this here prison for so long. We all know all the same jokes. So after a while, we just started giving them numbers, and yelling those numbers is enough to remind us of the joke instead of telling it." Wanting to fit in, the new prisoner walks up to the bars and yells, "6!" But instead of laughter, a dead silence falls on the cell block. He turns to the older prisoner. "What's wrong? Why didn't I get any laughs?" "You didn't tell it right." There was a blonde who found herself sitting next to a lawyer on an airplane. The lawyer just kept bugging the blonde, wanting her to play a game of intelligence. Finally, the lawyer offered her 10-to-1 odds and said every time the blonde could not answer one of his questions, she owed him $5, but every time he could not answer hers, he'd give her $50. The lawyer figured he could not lose, and the blonde reluctantly accepted. The lawyer first asked, "What is the distance between the Earth and the nearest star?" Without saying a word, the blonde handed him $5. Then the blonde asked, "What goes up a hill with 3 legs and comes back down the hill with 4 legs?" Well, the lawyer looked puzzled. He took several hours, looking up everything he could on his laptop, and even placing numerous air-to-ground phone calls trying to find the answer. Finally, angry and frustrated, he gave up and paid the blonde $50. The blonde put the $50 into her purse without comment. But the lawyer insisted, "What is the answer to your question?" Without saying a word, the blonde handed him $5. Ben went on safari with his wife and mother-in-law. One evening, while still deep in the jungle, Mrs. awoke to find her mother gone. Rushing to her husband, she insisted on them both trying to find her mother. Ben picked up his rifle, took a swig of whiskey, and started to look for her. In a clearing not far from the camp, they came upon a chilling sight. The mother-in-law was backed up against a thick, impenetrable bush, and a large male lion stood facing her. The wife said, "What are we going to do?" "Nothing," said Ben. "The lion got himself into this mess. Let him get himself out of it. One night, there were 3 female fugitives escaping from jail. One was blonde, one was brunette, and the other was a redhead. They had the police hot on their trail, and quickly thinking, the brunette points out an old, abandoned factory perfect for hiding in. When all 3 were inside, the redhead, quickly thinking, said they should all hide in old potato sacks in the corner, as they could hear the police approaching the factory. They all got in their little potato sacks, and barely a minute later, the police came crashing through the door. They looked at the sacks and said, maybe they are hiding in these. The officer kicks the redhead's sack, and she makes whimpering noises. Just puppies in that sack. The officer kicks the brunette's sack, and she makes mewing noises. Just kittens in that sack, he says. He finally kicks the blonde's sack, and he hears, "Potatoes, potatoes!" A blonde lived with 2 blonde roommates. She bought a new car, and on the way home from the dealer, she got caught in a terrible hailstorm. Her brand new car was dented all over. When she got home, she called the service department to ask what she should do. The service chief, being a prankster, told her to wait till the car was cool and then blow hard on the tailpipe, which would pop out all the dents. A half-hour later, her roomies saw her on her knees behind the car, blowing as hard as she could. They asked what the heck she was doing, and she told them, adding in a perplexed tone, "But it's not working." "You dummy," one of her blonde roommates said. "You have to roll up the windows first." I was sitting at a bar one time when I noticed that next to me, an old drunk was hassling one of the biggest, toughest guys I'd ever seen. The old guy was clearly blasted and kept getting in the tough guy's face, saying, "I slept with your mother." Despite being huge and jacked, the tough guy just kept shrugging it off. The old guy laughed in the tough guy's face, saying it again. "Hey, I slept with your mother." Then the old man even poked him and repeated himself, "No, seriously, I slept with your mother." At this point, finally, the tough guy had had enough. He grabbed the old man by his jacket and began to pull him out of the bar, yelling, "That's it! We're going home, Dad. You're drunk." A young couple got married and went away on their honeymoon. After 2 weeks, they came back and finally put away all of the presents they received from friends and family. Since this was a new home, the process took some time. A week later, they received 2 tickets in the mail for a popular show where tickets were impossible to get. They were very excited and warmed by the gesture of the person who sent this. Inside the envelope, however, was only a small piece of paper with a single line. Guess who sent them? The pair had much fun trying to identify the donor, but failed in the effort. They went to the theater and had a wonderful time. On their return home late at night, still trying to guess the identity of the unknown host, they found the house stripped of every article of value, and on the bare table in the dining room was a piece of paper on which was written in the same hand as the enclosure with the tickets. "Now you know." Paul got a part-time job at the post office. He was thrilled because he had been looking for employment for a while, without any luck. It wasn't long before his first day arrived, and he headed to the post office brimming with confidence. The first assignment his supervisor gave him was the job of sorting the mail. Paul separated the letters so fast that his motions were literally a blur. His supervisor didn't understand how he was capable of working so fast, but didn't question it. The supervisor approached Paul at the end of his first day. "I just want you to know," the supervisor said, "that I'm very pleased with the job you did today. You're one of the fastest workers we've ever had." "Thank you, sir," said Paul, beaming. "And tomorrow I'll try to do even better." "Better?" the supervisor asked with astonishment. "How can you possibly do any better than you did today?" Paul replied. "Tomorrow I'm going to read the addresses." A magazine reporter is traveling through a rainforest in search of a fabled cannibalistic tribe. He wanders through the thick jungle for days upon days, and it seems like his journey's going to amount to nothing. As he ventures deeper into it, his attention is drawn to something hanging overhead in the canopy. and he decides to take a closer look. Suddenly, he falls into a trap, is knocked unconscious, and wakes up tied to a stake with a fire burning slowly underneath him. He cries out for help and is answered by what is obviously one of the tribesmen, who informs him that he is going to be served as dinner to the leader of the tribe. "But you don't understand. You can't do this to me. I'm an editor for the New Yorker magazine." "Ah," replies the tribesman. "Well, soon you will be editor-in-chief." A panicked husband was advised by a psychiatrist to assert himself. "You don't have to let your wife bully you," he said. "Go home and show her you're the boss." The husband decided to take the doctor's advice. He went home, slammed the door, saw his wife, and growled, "From now on, you're taking orders from me. I want my supper right now, and after you get it on the table, go upstairs and lay out my clothes. Tonight, I am going out with the boys. You are going to stay at home where you belong. Another thing, you know who is going to tie my bow tie?" "I certainly do," said his wife calmly. "The Undertaker?" A college student wrote a letter home. "Dear folks, I feel miserable because I have to keep writing for money. I feel ashamed and unhappy. I have to ask for another 100, but every cell in my body rebels. I beg on bended knee that you forgive me. Your son, Marvin." I felt so terrible, I ran after the mailman who picked this up at the box at the corner. I wanted to take this letter and burn it. I prayed to God that I could get it back, but I was too late. A few days later, he received a letter from his father. "Dear son, good news. Your prayers were answered. Your letter never came." Grandpa was celebrating his 100th birthday, and everybody complimented him on how athletic and well-preserved he appeared. "Gentlemen, I will tell you the secret of my success," he cackled. "I have been in the open air day after day for some 75 years now." The celebrants were impressed and asked how he managed to keep up his rigorous fitness regime. He replied, "Well, you see, my wife and I were married 75 years ago. On our wedding night, we made a solemn pledge. Whenever we had a fight, the one who was proved wrong would go outside and take a walk." One day, 3 unemployed factory workers heard that a large food company was expanding and needed more staff. So they went downtown to see if they could get themselves a job. After filling out their applications, each one was interviewed, and each one managed to get hired. As they were waiting to be assigned their new duties, a foreman came by and spoke to the hiring boss. The foreman told the boss that he didn't think it was such a good idea as one of the workers had snapped for no apparent reason at his last job. Also, a second was said to have cracked up after severe mental stress. The third, he believed, was their father, who he felt was a bit odd, but he couldn't put his finger on it. The hiring boss reassured the foreman and said that they would start on something easy, and after a week, the company would reassess them to see if they would be kept on. The foreman reluctantly agreed and asked the boss where he thought they should start. The boss replied, "Why not take them and put them in our cereal division? Snap, Crackle, and Pop should work out fine down there." There were these 2 elderly people living in a Florida mobile home park. He was a widower, and she was a widow. They had known one another for a number of years. Now, one evening, there was a community supper in the big activity center. These 2 were at the same table across from one another. As the meal went on, he made a few admiring glances at her and finally gathered up his courage to ask her, "Will you marry me?" After a dramatic pause and precisely 6 seconds of careful consideration, she answered, "Yes, yes, I will." The meal ended, and with a few more pleasant exchanges, they went to their respective places. Next morning, he was troubled. Did she say yes, or did she say no? He couldn't remember, try as he would. He just could not recall, not even a faint memory. With trepidation, he went to the telephone and called her. First, he explained to her that he didn't remember as well as he used to. Then he reviewed the lovely evening past. As he gained a little more courage, he then inquired of her, "When I asked if you would marry me, did you say yes, or did you say no?" He was delighted to hear her say, "Why, I said, 'Yes, yes, I will, and I meant it with all my heart.'" Then she continued, "And I am so glad that you called because I couldn't remember who had asked me." On their wedding night, the husband handed his wife $500 with a playful grin and said, "You know, I've never done this for free." With a twinkle in her eye, the wife quickly returned $200 and shot back, "Well, I've never charged anyone more than $300 either." Two guys are walking through the woods and come across this big, deep hole. "Wow, that looks deep." "Sure does. Toss a few pebbles in there and see how deep it is." They pick up a few pebbles and throw them in and wait. No noise. "Geez, that is really Here, throw one of these great big rocks down there. Those should make a noise." They pick up a couple of football-sized rocks and toss them into the hole and wait and wait. Nothing. They look at each other in amazement. One gets a determined look on his face and says, "Hey, over here in the weeds, there's a railroad tie. Help me carry it over here. When we toss that sucker in, it's going to make some noise." The two drag the heavy tie over to the hole and heave it in. Not a sound comes from the hole. Suddenly, out of the nearby woods, a goat appears, running like the wind. It rushes toward the two men, then right past them, running as fast as its legs will carry it. Suddenly, it leaps in the air and into the hole. The two men are astonished with what they've just seen. Then, out of the woods comes a farmer who spots the men and ambles over. "Hey, you two guys seen my goat out here?" "You bet we did, the craziest thing I've ever seen. It came running like crazy and just jumped into this hole." "Nah," says the farmer. "That couldn't have been my goat. My goat was chained to a railroad tie." A man enters a sexy lingerie store to purchase a sheer negligee for his wife. He is shown several possibilities that range from $250 to $500 in price. The more sheer, the higher the price. Naturally, he opts for the sheerest item, pays the $500, and takes it home. He presents it to his wife and asks her to go upstairs, put it on, and model it for him. Upstairs, the wife thinks, she's no dummy, "I have an idea. It's so sheer that it might as well be nothing. I won't put it on. I'll do the model, return it tomorrow, and keep the $500 refund for myself." She appears on the balcony and strikes a pose. The husband says, "Good grief, you'd think for $500 they'd at least iron it." He never heard the shot. Funeral on Thursday at noon. The coffin will be closed. 3 Russian men are sitting in jail cell together. One of them asks the 2 others, "So what did you do?" The first one answers, "Well, I arrived late at the factory, and so they accused me of slowing down the revolution and the victory of the proletariat." The second one answers, "Well, I arrived early at the factory, and so they accused me of wanting to be favored and promoted over my fellow workers." Then they turn to the one who asked the question, "How about you, then?" "Well, I arrived at the factory right on time, and so they accused me of having a watch from the West." A merchant captain and several of his officers were returning to the ship after a big evening ashore. As they climbed the gangway, the captain threw up all over himself. Pointing to an apprentice seaman above him, he shouted, "Give that man 5 days in the brig for vomiting." The following morning, the captain was checking the log and saw that the young seaman had been sentenced to 10 days and asked the chief mate why. "Well, sir, when we got you undressed, we found that he'd also soiled your pants." A man suffered a serious heart attack and had bypass surgery. He awakened to find himself in the care of nuns at a Catholic hospital. As he was recovering, a nun asked how he was going to pay the bill. He replied in a raspy voice, "No health insurance." The nun asked if he had money in the bank. He replied, "No money in the bank." The nun asked, "Do you have a relative who could help you?" He said, "Just a spinster sister who is a nun." The nun, slightly perturbed, said, "Nuns are not spinsters. Nuns are married to God." The patient replied, "Then send the bill to my brother-in-law." A couple in their 90s were both having problems remembering things. During a checkup, the doctor told them that they were physically okay, but might want to start writing things down to help them remember. Later that night, while watching TV, the old man got up from his chair. "Want anything while I'm in the kitchen?" he asked. "Will you get me a bowl of ice cream?" "Sure." "Don't you think you should write it down so you can remember it?" she asked. "No, I can remember it." "Well, I'd like some strawberries on top, too. Maybe you should write it down so as not to forget it." He said, "I can remember that." "You want a bowl of ice cream with strawberries?" "I'd also like whipped cream. I'm certain you'll forget that. Write it down," she asked. Irritated, he said, "I don't need to write it down. I can remember it. Ice cream with strawberries and whipped cream. I got it, for goodness sake." Then he toddled off into the kitchen. After about 20 minutes, the old man returned and handed his wife a plate of bacon and eggs. She stared at the plate for a moment. "Where's my toast?" A middle-aged woman has a heart attack and is taken to the hospital. While on the operating table, she has a near-death experience. During that experience, she sees God and asks if this is it. God says no and explains that she has another 30 to 40 years to live. Upon her recovery, she decides to just stay in the hospital and have a facelift, liposuction, breast augmentation, tummy tuck. You name it, she had it. She even has someone come in and change her hair color. She figures since she's got another 30 or 40 years, she might as well make the most of it. She walks out of the hospital after the last operation and is killed by an ambulance speeding up to the hospital. She arrives in front of God and asks, "I thought you said I had another 30 to 40 years. "Oh, sorry," said God. "I didn't recognize you." James is walking on a downtown street one day, and he happens to see his old high school friend Harry a little way up ahead. "Harry, how are you?" He greets his old buddy after getting his attention. "Not so good," says Harry. "Why, what happened?" James queries. "Well," Harry says, "I just went bankrupt, and I've still got to feed my family. I don't know what I'm going to do." "Could have been worse," James replies calmly. "Could have been worse." A month or so later, James again encounters Harry in a restaurant. "And how are things now?" he asks. "Terrible," says Harry. "Our house burned down last night." "Could have been worse," says James, again with total aplomb, and goes about his business. A month later, James runs into Harry a third time. "Well, how goes it?" he inquires. "Oh," says Harry, "things just get worse and worse. It's one tragedy after another. Now my wife has left me." Harry nods his head and gives his usual optimistic-seeming little smile, accompanied by his usual words, "Could have been worse." This time, Harry grabs James by the shoulders. "Wait a minute," he says. "I'm not going to let you off so easy this time. 3 times in the past few months, we've run into one another, and every time I've told you the latest disaster in my life. Every time you say the same thing, could have been worse. This time, for God's sake, Harry, I want you to tell me, how in heaven's name could it have been any worse?" James smiles at him. Could have happened to me. A man lies on his deathbed, surrounded by his family, a weeping wife and 4 children. 3 of the children are tall, good-looking, and athletic, but the 4th and youngest is an ugly runt. "Darling wife," the husband whispers, "assure me that the youngest child really is mine. I want to know the truth before I die. I will forgive you if—" The wife gently interrupts him. "Yes, my dearest, absolutely, no question. I swear on my mother's grave that you are his father." The man then dies, happy. The wife mutters under her breath, Thank God he didn't ask about the other three. Two delicate blossoms of southern femininity were conversing on the porch of a large white-pillared mansion. The first woman said, "When my first child was born, my husband built this beautiful mansion for me." The second woman commented, "Well, isn't that nice?" The first woman continued, "When my second child was born, my husband bought me that fine Cadillac automobile you see parked in the driveway." Again, the second woman commented, "Well, isn't that nice?" The first woman boasted, "Then when my third child was born, my husband bought me this exquisite diamond bracelet." Yet again, the second woman commented, "Well, isn't that nice?" The first woman then asked her companion, "What did your husband buy for you when you had your first child?" The second woman replied, "My husband sent me to charm school." "Charm school?" The first woman cried, "Land sakes, child, what on earth for?" So that instead of saying, "Who gives a crap?" I learned to say, "Well, isn't that nice?" A plane left JFK Airport toward its destination in Europe without any unnecessary delays. During the flight, while the plane was at an elevation of 31,000 feet, a loud explosion was heard. A traveler named Dave looked out the window of the plane and said, "God help us!" He shouted, "One of the engines exploded." The rest of the passengers left their seats and went toward Dave to see what was going on, when at that very moment, a loud explosion was heard from the other side of the plane. At this point, all the passengers on the plane were in total panic, and even the flight attendants couldn't calm them down. At that very moment, Captain John came out of the cockpit, smiling, happy and calm, and declared, "Valued passengers, you can be calm. Everything is under control, and you have no reason to worry." The captain's words helped calm things down. The flight attendants managed to restore order, and the passengers returned to their seats. At that time, the captain turned to the door of the plane and began handing out large bags to the crew, who tied them on their backs. "Hey," said Dave the passenger, "are you tying parachutes to your backs?" Captain John answered in the affirmative, and Dave continued, "Just a second. Didn't you say there was nothing to worry about and everything is under control?" "That's true, and you have no reason to worry," the captain replied. And at the same time, a loud explosion was heard from the third engine. "We're just going to get help." A man joins a big corporate empire as a trainee. On his very first day of work, he dials the pantry and shouts into the phone, "Get me a coffee quickly." It turns out that he didn't dial the pantry at all. The voice from the other side responded, "You fool! You've dialed the wrong extension. Do you know who you're talking to, Dumbo?" "No," replied the trainee. "It's the CEO of the company, you fool." The trainee pauses for a moment to think about an appropriate response. The trainee shouts back, "And do you know who you are talking to, you fool?" "No," replied the CEO indignantly. "Good," replied the trainee, and put down the phone. Ron, an elderly man in Australia, had owned a large farm for several years. He had a large pond at the back. It was properly shaped for swimming, so he fixed it up nice with picnic tables, horseshoe courts, and some orange and lime trees. One evening, the old farmer decided to go down to the pond, as he hadn't been there for a while, and look it over. He grabbed a 5-gallon bucket to bring back some fruit. As he neared the pond, he heard voices shouting and laughing with glee. As he came closer, he saw it was a bunch of young women, skinny dipping in his pond. He made the women aware of his presence, and they all went to the deep end. One of them shouted to him, "We're not coming out until you leave." Ron frowned. "I didn't come down here to watch you ladies swim or make you get out of the pond naked." Holding the bucket up, he said, "I'm here to feed the alligator." David received a parrot for his birthday. The parrot was fully grown with a bad attitude and worse vocabulary. Every other word was obscenity. Those that weren't expletives were, to say the least, rude. David tried hard to change the bird's attitude and was constantly saying polite words, playing soft music, anything he could think of. Nothing worked. He yelled at the bird, and the bird yelled back. He shocked the bird, and the bird just got more angry and more rude. Finally, in a moment of desperation, David put the bird in the freezer, just for a few moments. He heard the bird squawk and kick and scream. Then suddenly, there was quiet. David was frightened that he might have hurt the bird and quickly opened the freezer door. The parrot calmly stepped out and said, "I believe I may have offended you with my rude language and actions. I'll endeavor at once to correct my behavior. I really am truly sorry and beg your forgiveness." David was astonished at the bird's change in attitude and was about to ask what had made such a dramatic change when the parrot continued, "May I ask, what did the chicken do?"
If you're still here, I'm thrilled you enjoyed the joke. Subscribing is a simple way to stay connected. Join our community and make me a happy friend.